Hello, good listeners, and welcome to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Regular listeners will recall a conversation I had with Andrew Unger that aired in October of 2025. Andrew is an author and the mind behind the satirical Mennonite news site, the Unger Review. During our chat, we talked extensively about Andrew's novel, Once Removed. The story is a humorous tale that pits a development-minded mayor against a town employee who wants to see the town's history preserved rather than built anew. Here's our conversation. Let's talk for a minute about Timothy Heppner, the protagonist in your book, Once Removed. Timothy is a ghostwriter and a heritage enthusiast in a small rural town who's trying to preserve the town's history. The mayor is Timothy's nemesis, and he's bent on a pro-pavement policy. That's a pretty niche topic in the world of fiction, yet the book has won numerous awards. What inspired the subject, and why do you think it's drawn the attention of the award recognition?
You know, I think even though the subject matter is somewhat niche, it takes place in a small town in Manitoba. There's untranslated ploteach thrown in there, so it's somewhat niche in that sense. But I think the themes of progress and preservation, or the themes of, to what degree do they feel a part of their community versus desire to leave, or the desire to go from the small town or the big city, those kind of themes, I think, fit from many different groups and in many different groups of people or different locations and so on. So I think that the themes and the humor are universal, even if some of the specifics are a little niche.
Do you have any sense that people beyond the Mennonite community are reading Once Removed?
They definitely are, kind of like the website as well, too. There's people from a lot of different backgrounds. I just spoke at a college class in Vancouver that was assigned Once Removed as a textbook. This is not a Mennonite, post-secondary institution, and they were not, and none of the professor told me none of the people in the students in the class had a Mennonite background. But they, at least as far as I could tell, they seemed to relate to, some of the struggles that the characters have. For example, wanting to preserve your own culture, at the same time, sometimes being self-conscious about some aspects of your own culture. So that you could replace Mennonite and insert any, say, immigrant culture in that situation, and people can relate to some of those ideas. What aspects of my parents' culture, let's say you're second generation Canadian, what aspects of my parents' culture do I want to preserve? What aspects do I not want to? Do I want to speak the language, or do I not want to carry it on, and so on? Those are all themes that I talk about in the book, and those are some of the things that these students who came from a wide range of backgrounds resonated with.
Any kind of writing project, fiction included, requires research. Where did you do the research for Once Removed?
Yeah, so Once Removed, it takes place in a contemporary times, although I kind of it's deliberately anachronistic. Like, for example, there's some aspects of culture and technology where I'm drawing on things that are from the 1970s, but it's saying it's now. So I'm deliberately playing with those things. It's also deliberately not in an identifiable geographic location. For example, I take elements from what would be stereotypically considered East Reserve things and mix it with things that would be considered West Reserve. For example, the still existing house barns, I take that from the West, former West Reserve, where there's none where I live near Steinbach, although there's other aspects I take from Steinbach. So I'm deliberately mixing all these things together. So when you do that, you got to do a lot of research, but also you really have to emphasize to people, this is fiction. So don't go in this saying, well, this is wrong, or this is wrong, or this is wrong, because it's fiction. I'm deliberately playing with these things to make it more universal and stuff. So I did quite a lot of research, because it mentions, although it takes place now, in contemporary times, it mentions a lot of things from history, from Mennonite history, both early Anabaptist history. There's a one character who has tattoos of martyrs all over her all over her body, and I had to research which ones would be the appropriate ones to include. And there's some scenes also that take place in. There's an archive scene where the characters go to the archives.
Is that loosely based on the MHA?
Well, I don't want to ever say that something is directly directly corresponds to any real life place, but I will say yes, we did come to the MHA, and I was keeping note of what were the archives even like. What would it look like? In the book, I made the location of the archives be in a small town, but I definitely drew on some elements there. That's what you do as a fiction writer, is you take details from reality. Like, I could go to the MHA, observe what things are like there, and then tweak them, change them, to make it fiction, which is what I do with the characters and settings throughout the book, is you never are sitting someplace and describing something exactly as it is. So I was thinking about, did I do research at the MHA? I did do research at the MHA, but it was more about how do archives function and what does an archivist do? Because I didn't really know too much about that before writing those scenes.
But the book also, it clearly shows that you know something of Mennonite history. Where did your knowledge of Mennonite history come from?
I did take a course in university, but that was so long ago. I think a lot of it was just from my own interest. And when I started the Unger Review, it was then called the Daily Bonnet. When I started that, I think about a year after that, Aaron started blogging with Manitoba, and that was Mennonite history-related things. And so I was visiting historic sites, old cemeteries, and things like that. And that also comes up in the book as well, too, the destruction of history. And I realized, I think, in visiting some of these places with Aaron, that in, let's say, near where I live in Steinbach, there are very few, even though Steinbach was supposedly settled in 1874, there are no buildings at all that come close to being that old, except at the museum. We have very few historic buildings in town, whereas you compare it to, like, say, Morden, there's old buildings. Why is it that they have some old buildings and Steinbach virtually has none? So that, inspired some of the things in the book too. So it was not necessarily that I was always deliberately researching things, but just my own interest in things led to picking up on some details and then sometimes going back and through research filling in the pieces.
What do you hope people come away with from reading Once Removed?
I do hope that people laugh. I mean, it is a comedy, but I think if people know me from my satirical writing, I think if you come to it only thinking it's only a comedy, you might miss some things. So I think my hope is that people will see there's more to it than just comedy. Like there's ideas in there, there's thoughts about how communities should and shouldn't function and so on. How should we relate to each other, and what our relationship is with our own past, or what our relationship is with our own stories. I hope that people think about those things as well, in addition to, maybe getting a chuckle.
Hypothetical question. Places like the Mennonite Heritage Archives are in the business of preserving history. What would happen to writers like you if that function were lost? Can books even exist in the absence of preserved history?
Sometimes there's a perception that the fiction writer and the historian are at odds with each other, because the historian is only interested in the facts, only the facts, and anything that can't be backed up and documented and is maybe discarded. And that's an important function. And then the fiction writer, in contrast to that, is seen as sort of like making things up, right? And I think that tension, and one of the things I tried to explore in Once Removed, was that those two functions don't need to be seen as at odds with each other. So I definitely think that the fiction writers benefit from the historians, and they benefit from archives, and they benefit from the work that historians and archivists are doing, and the archivists and historians benefit from the work that fiction writers are doing too, because they're both doing something different. But what they have in common is they're both telling stories. History is a story that happens to be factual, or it should be anyways. Fiction is a story that's a truth in a different way. It's a truth, maybe an emotional truth or something, where it has details that are not found in the history, that are maybe more imaginative, but still might be true or could be true or whatever. And I think both of those are important aspects of being a fully rounded human being. Those are both aspects of who we are. So one of the things that I tried to portray in the book was that these two groups don't need to be seen as at odds with each other, and they can have a harmonious relationship. So I definitely think the fiction writers benefit from the archives and from the work done by historians. I certainly appreciate it.
If you could go back in time and talk with someone who is no longer with us, whether it's an author or somebody else, who would that be and why?
Historic person that I'm kind of intrigued about is, I don't know if he would be well known to your listeners or not, but there's it was Klaus Reimer's son, actually, named Abram Reimer, who had the nickname Fool Reimer. He's also my it's 2 or 3 great grandfather.
For the non-Low German audience, Fühler Reimer
means lazy, right? So he was given this nickname lazy because apparently he was not such a good farmer, and he was more interested in learning and reading and writing. And his diaries, I came to see them here at the Mennonite Heritage Archive. So it was amazing to see my great-great-great-grandfather's handwritten diaries, which were kind of famous in Steinbach circles. At least people have an interest in history. These are famous diaries. And it was amazing. I had no idea I didn't even know they existed somewhere. I just all my life I heard about Fühler Reimer's diaries. And it's not just any diary, but the fact that the diary kind of represents why he was given the nickname, because he was writing rather than farming.
He had time to write.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a luxury.
And the nickname was, though it was not meant as a compliment. I mean, that was an insulting nickname. It was saying why is he wasting his time with looking at the stars? He was interested in astronomy. He was interested in what was going on around him and so on. He documented all this stuff. It's a very valuable artifact to have. I would like to talk, that's someone I would like to talk to, because I feel like he's a misunderstood figure. There's his own diaries, but as far as I know, he never talks about his nickname or what he felt about that or how people perceived him. There's none of that, in there as far as I know. So that would be someone I would have a lot of questions for how did people treat you? And because in some ways, I feel like I don't want to say that I am like him, but in some ways, yeah. I didn't become a farmer either. And now, of course, that didn't have the stigma that it did 150 years ago. But still, I feel like maybe I could relate to him in some ways.
His nickname suggests that satire and sarcasm was alive and well in the Mennonite community.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't above a biting insult.
Thank you so much for entertaining all my curious questions.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Andrew's book, Once Removed, is part of the collection at the MHA. To see some documents related to Andrew's ancestors, Klaus Reimer and Abram Reimer, or to listen to this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. What are you taking away from this show? Dash off an email to us and post it via info@mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
Next week, we'll take a look at how and why the Saskatchewan and British Columbia governments collaborated to relocate Mennonite families from the prairies to the Burns Lake region of BC in the early 1940s. Thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace and David Klippenstein. Join us again next week for another story. Thanks for listening.